Hi, it's Janet Fitch, and this is Writing Wednesday. Noon on Wednesday. Always try to be here then, answering your questions about writing, the writing life, creativity, um, and anything else thus related. So, welcome to Writing Wednesday. I am. I'll begin by saying that I'm going to be teaching a weekend intensive at the Community of Writers May 13th, 14th, and 15th, Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, May 13th through 15th on Point of View. And interestingly enough, I have point of view questions that have been sent to me this week, so I'm happy to talk to you about your own questions. Put them in the comments, and I will do my best to answer them. Otherwise, I have... Hi, Tochi? Good to see you. So I always have questions that come in on the interwebs. Hi, Lewis. But you can ask me in comments any questions, and if you have questions during the week, you can send them to me through my website, Janet Fitch Writes, and I will design a Writing Wednesday around your question. So always happy to have those questions. It's not bothering me, even if you have written to me before. Don't feel like you've used up your time. You know, I'm very happy to have those questions. Hi, Miranda. Hi, Jeffrey. Happy to have those questions. Believe me, if you have them, other people have them too. So you're always representing the team and not just yourself. So don't feel bashful about asking for help with your own question. Hi, Alicia. So we got quite a few questions today, and I will do a few. The first question is a simple dialogue question. When writing an historical fiction novel, should your character speak in more modern English and skip the archaic language dialects? This is an interesting question. It's a question of taste. If you think about what you're looking for when you read an historic novel, hi Jill, you don't want people to be chewing gum and, speaking in contemporary language, how's about it, and all those, contemporary idioms. I don't want to see that I find it jarring. I find it difficult to enter into an earlier period when it is smeared with contemporary language, first quarter 21st century language. I know people love those shows like the Catherine the Great TV show, where people think it's interesting to have very contemporary language and very contemporary everything except for the clothes and the palaces, and that's extremely amusing. When I read historical fiction, I want to enter into a different time, place, and headspace. So, on the other hand, I don't want the language to be so archaic that it becomes a joke, like a Monty Python sketch. Proceed, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, that's going too far. So that's what I mean. It's a matter of its taste. and I don't mean it's a matter of taste, like, to each their own. I mean, it's a matter of taste, like how you put an outfit together, how you put bring a meal together, a dish on the stove. It really is, a test of the writer's sensibility, their taste, of what the balance is going to be between readability for the contemporary reader and that sense of moving back in time that the reader of historical fiction in general is interested in. And I think that just for the most part, sparingly is good. Like having a light touch with cayenne in your cooking. If you're going to, when you use language from the period, say you're trying to bring across 17th century England, you're going to want to perhaps use words or phrases from that period, especially if it's easy to understand what they're talking about without too much. And then I think that you're going to want to think of, you always think of education, class, of what kind of language your characters would speak. We're talking about we're talking about dialogue here, not the narrative. So in general, I would try not to, be very careful of any kind of contemporary jargon, uses, pop psych uses, phrases, boots on the ground, any kind of contemporary phrases that you hear on the news, that you hear, generally speaking, either a very clean, out of time language in which you lay some elements of the time period. I think that is often the best way of handling historical. And then sometimes it's historical also in another country. So you have to think about the level of education, the length of the sentence. People had better vocabulary in those days, any days but ours. Better vocabulary, longer sentences, more, maybe more, a few words and phrases that would have been in common use then, that kind of color it, give it a little, use that as a flavoring rather than as, here's a scoop of turmeric as your main course. So always in using a sense of taste. So Jeffrey says historical fiction set in an alternative timeline where history is played out differently is where you really want to give the feeling of that period. Say you want to do an alternative Civil War. Well, you would like to, you want to be even more evocative of the actual time and place so that it's recognizable as you are altering elements of it. Otherwise, you're in Catherine the Great territory, Bridgerton, contemporary in wearing costumes, I think, you don't want to be thick on the dialect or, too thick on the historical accuracy. It'll make it very hard to read. So you're going to remove some of the archaicism and use selected phrases and ways of thinking, you know. We don't say sire or ma'am anymore. Maybe if you live in the South, you say ma'am, sir. But generally, that would be an earlier period. And you would include that kind of thing because it's easy to read. It gives a feel for the condition of the speaker. Here's another question, historical. When writing historical fiction, is the story itself or the historical accuracy more important? Well, that's a really interesting question. And there's a spectrum of answers, depending on the ambition of the writer. You don't want to write a textbook. You're writing a novel, and the history is the wallpaper. The history is the backdrop to the story. If you are writing about, say, what was the name of the prison? There was a wonderful book written about a prison during the Civil War. The name of it escapes me. What goes on in the prison is the important thing, and what goes on to characters, and then the rest of it pulls back, becomes the background. And accuracy is important, but it's not the focus. When it's the focus, it's more, it's a foreground background problem. And you always want the Andersonville. Thank you very much. Andersonville. That's a really good book. And, you want the sense of being in a place and a time. But as far as pulling back and giving, by blunt force, including historical detail that does not bear on this scene, or that scene. You're not writing a history. You're writing a novel, and the history then comes into it. It bleeds into it. You usually don't pull back and, just get it raw. Although the way some people are able to get a lot of the history in is, skillfully. Cold Mountain. There's a Volman book, Europe Central, World War II, a lot of good history in that. Look at Solzhenitsyn, look at Cancer Ward, or The First Circle, or Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. He wrote a big history of the Gulag, but the fiction is much more compelling and memorable. The other is a reference book. The point of historical fiction is to put you inside the history. You are a character living through something. So here's another question about that. There's a point of view question, actually, that's about this. So let's see. How do I write a long science fiction novel written in the first person? I want to convey information that the protagonist doesn't know, and I can't think of any way to deliver the information without info dumping, meaning writing a high school textbook, without info dumping through another character's dialogue. Yeah, we never want to do that. So I'm going to be teaching a class in point of view, and I've been thinking a lot about point of view. So whenever I get a question like this, I'm like, yeah, point of view. But this would be the same thing in historical fiction, because we were just talking about that. This question is about science fiction. But it's the same problem. Okay, written in the first person. So when you're in the first person, you don't pull out anywhere and say, as a result of Colonel Burroughs' decision of 18, so and so is happening right now. you're always seeing it through the eyes of your first person character who can't know everything that's going on. How do you work the information in? I wrote the Russian Revolution novels from the first person, and I had a lot of historical information that I could include if I could find a way to work it in. You have to work it in. You'd never dump. But you figure out a way to work it in. If I have to give, I have a first-person character, my poet, Marina Makarova, growing up during the Russian Revolution, there's going to be all kinds of things she doesn't have any way of knowing. She's not in the room with Lenin and Trotsky. Nobody is, the newspapers have their own way of telling the stories. But there are things that I want to make sure that there are essential parts of the revolution that I wanted to make sure that the reader could follow. So I found ways, for instance, she had a friend from school who was a committed Bolshevist and became a member of their secret police, the Cheka. And that girl knew a lot more than my friend did. My character did. Her friend. And so there are times where she, say, has to go to her friend to find out what's going on, or to ask a favor, or to find out something. And her friend will fill her in of what is going on, what she needs to do, what she shouldn't be. Don't be thinking about this. This is what's really going on. And causing a lot of upset when you realize, oh, it's not what I thought. Oh my God, they're doing this. And I trusted them, and this is what's going on. So having somebody else who's more in the know, but it can't be an info dump. It's got to be related to the character's problem, what she goes in for, and then the answer that her friend will give her. The friend pushes her politically. The friend is much more knowledgeable about the unfolding of revolution and day-to-day what's going on. So that's one way to handle it. The other thing that they would do is they had wall sheets. Newspapers weren't being printed at the time. There was paper scarcity. And they would put, people couldn't really afford them, newspapers. And so they would glue them up on the walls, and people would stand around and read the paper. And you would narrate that rather than doing that in dialogue. I would do some quotes from the paper that I was seeing on the wall, that my character is seeing on the wall, that it announced that this would be outlawed, or this would be, this would happen. And people would talk about what they were seeing. So you'd get different points of view of other people in dialogue as they reacted to what they were reading on the wall newspaper, and then the characters thinking about how they're processing it. And many times you get information in a revolution or a war, people sort out what they're going to believe. And this is like happening now, right? People get some propaganda, say. The newspapers were, by the first year of the revolution, were pretty much all controlled by the Bolsheviks. And so everybody was always reading between the lines of what's really going on. And people will have various opinions about that. That's a way to handle information in a first person when your character can't possibly know all the information that the reader needs to understand the situation. But you don't want them to know They don't need to know everything. They need to know enough to understand the scene that you're writing. They need to know what's happening right now that applies to the character's situation. Lewis says the wall sheets persisted until the end of World War II. Chicago Art Institute had a show of some of the wall posters. Yeah, well, Pravda used to go up on the wall, Izvestia, these, and there were always pronouncements that would go up on the wall. You know, I know the Nazis did that. They just put the proclamations on the walls. So people would read that, and then they would get information. Having a character in the know. I have characters in the Revolution of Marina M and Chimes of Lost Cathedral who are railwaymen. And the railwaymen, because they had the telegraph, knew a lot more of what was going on. And she has a lover who is in Chimes of Lost Cathedral. She has a lover who works for the railroad. And they know a lot more than the average person because they have the telegraph. So you figure out how information is conveyed in a society. Who is likely to know things? If you have I just saw Station 11, the TV show, and I'd read the book, and they have early on, one of the characters' sister works in a hospital and sees the pandemic and tells the brother to go, stock up on food and, seal himself in somewhere with his brother, because this is the real thing. This is not a joke. So having an informant is a way to get information without doing an info dump in authorial voice, in the first person. How else did we get information? You hear a speech, you hear people talking on the street corner, you hear people at a party, but it has to be in character. And nobody gets speeches, did you hear it? But everybody talks at the dinner table, the kitchen table, on the stairway, in the bread lines, where during the Revolution there were bread lines. So many ways that you can deliver information without info dumping through another character's dialogue. It's never a dump. There's always a reason, a purpose to the way they are. A character who wants to seem who wants to show off how connected they are, will give valuable information to look good, to be one of the in the know. It'll be different people have a line on different kinds of information. They're the character who is the railway man, her lover. They'll lie in bed after they've made love, and she'll have him look at a map and tell her like where the troops are. 1919. The Russian Civil War. So he knows. But it's very much a part of their relationship that he knows things. And it's something she likes about him. And he doesn't have a lot to offer, but he has that to offer. And it's something they do together. So it always has to be folded into character, especially in first person. And we'll talk, when I teach, we're going to talk about authorial omniscient, third person, how far, and authorial voice, a narrative voice, which people don't talk enough about. We really need to understand this, of how far back can an author pull from the characters and the action to actually describe, in spring, for 1942, there was the offensive of blah, 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 happened and X number of troops died and they gave up these bridges and blah, blah, blah. And then you move closer and then you pick up your character who is fighting in the 5th Brigade of whatever, and coming, back. If you look at Volman's Europe Central, that's very strong that way, and so is War and Peace. You can get a good look of how you, if you're not in first person, if you are in third, how you can pull back and have that focal length come in and out, and have the actual author's voice just telling you stuff that you need to know before coming back in to pick up that character again. So that'll be something I definitely want to talk about, because there's this prejudice against something that the authorial omniscient, which was the predominant means of storytelling in the 19th century, had an author who was sort of God, and God knows all. God knows what everybody's thinking. But God can also pull back and talk directly about the situation and what they see and what they think. What the author thinks is the way the universe is constructed. And there is a prejudice against omniscience that started, you can say, at the beginning of the 20th century, when the idea that there was a God, I think, affected literature in a subtle way. And one of the ways it affects literature is that we doubt that there is this overarching consciousness, that we think more, everybody is kind of this world locked in their head, and we only see what we can see. We're really limited. We're deep, and we can go deep inside. Look at Virginia Woolf, look at the whole modernist project, Joyce. The individual, there's a world inside the individual that he has or she has access to. But you cannot, nobody's going to pull back and say, and what this guy's thinking is this, what this guy's thinking is, and then what the voice of God is saying and thinking about all these lesser creatures, the characters. Now people, they use a word now that irritates the shit out of me, quite frankly, called, they say it's head hopping, to go and do what's Barbara's thinking, and then what John's thinking, and so and so. I think that what is lacking when people try to move from character to character, consciousness, what's lacking is the authorial voice that holds it, that these become, they're like raisins in a pudding, but the pudding's missing. And people sense that, just hopping from character to character. It's jarring every time you are hauled out of one point of view and then slammed into somebody else's head. And you start thinking with that person, and you've hauled out of that person, slammed into, I'm somebody who gets motion sickness. And I do not like that either, being pulled in and out of different people's consciousness. But when you have a strong authorial voice and you use the authorial omniscient rather than just thinking, authorial omniscient means I know what everybody's thinking. Boom, boom, boom. Johnny thinks that. And then Tommy is like, I could use some ice cream. And then Ginny is like, my socks are falling down. It's just like, just settle on somebody, for God's sakes. What we do in 20th century, following modernism and into the 21st, is speak for yourself. Just speak for yourself. You can't speak for anybody else. So the third person, close third, tends to be favored over the omniscient. And everybody just sees their own, from their own point of view. And so many remarkable novels are in that limited, the close third. I used it in Painted Black. I like a close third, like it has many of the benefits of first person, the vividness, the urgency, and but you also can pull back a bit and see the character as well in third, where you can't do that in first. Louis said, can you describe third person close a little bit? Yeah, I can do that. Third person close is like he held the phone under his chin, writing down the message from Ginny, his brow in multiple horizontal waves. You can do that in a close third and still be, hanging on the phone with him. But you can see his face, you can describe him, we normally don't think of our own gestures. You'll see that way if you take my class. We're going to really play with this hard. There are limitations to first person, and one of them is observing what the protagonist does, because it's very awkward to describe yourself or your own gestures, and making statements about the character that just would seem strange for a person to think of themselves. I'm reading something now that has, let's see if I can find one. I'm reading a new book by Heidi Sopinka, who wrote the Dictionary of Animal Languages. Such a good book. So this isn't going to be out for a while. But, Paz has seen only one photo of her relatives. Their life had been ass-breaking poor. Okay, think of this as first person. I have only seen one photo of my relatives. Their life had been ass-breakingly poor. Do you see that there's like a slightly different distance? Why am I telling you I've only seen one picture of my relatives? It has to be more of the moment in first person, whereas you can pull back just a little bit and tell us a little bit more about that third person, that close third. So you're almost first person, but she had felt almost comforted in the cold, because cold is hard. It's a mobilizing activity. People prepared for it. They're like animals. Here it is in first. I had felt almost comforted in the cold, because cold is hard. It's a mobilizing activity. People prepare for it. They're like animals. The character has to be capable of that kind of introspective and insight. Whereas in third person, they don't have to have that vocabulary. Like I did Painted Black in third, because my character, although a very observant person, wouldn't have the vocabulary to describe the kinds of things that she would actually notice. So I can make it Josie saw or Josie thought, rather than having her think that. It's not believable if I use a certain level of vocabulary. We'll pull that apart if you take the class, we'll pull that apart in detail. But its first is strong because it's voice. The voice has to justify what you lose in first, you gain in immediacy. And if the character has a strong voice, then it's worth what you're going to lose to keep the voice. Whereas in third, the voice drops down, but you pick up a lot of things that you can see, that you can talk about. So it's always a choice, and we're going to really tear into that. There's a couple more questions. Anybody else have questions before I go on? Okay, this is about male and female. We have 2 questions. How should my male characters experience emotion? My brothers keep telling me that my characters are acting gay and that it's unrealistic writing, but I'm just trying to make them sensitive people. Okay, well, this is obviously men are characters. There are all kinds of men. Some are sensitive, some are not. Rather than making generalizations about men, I would say that this is a person who her brothers keep saying that her men characters seem more feminine than she wanted them to. I think that's the key. They're more sensitive, more feminine than she wanted them to, or that her brothers thought these characters that you've created are not as masculine as these guys think they should be. And what does that mean? It's interesting because not every guy is going to be, Buck Rogers of the 21st century. I mean, not every guy is guys aren't the same. Characters aren't the same. So you have to decide what kind of character this guy, your guys are. So let's say one guy. You have to decide what kind of character they are, including their gender identity and their, the sexuality, their physicality, their reactivity, their, how much do they identify with, say, her cowboy masculinity or goth masculinity or, emo masculinity or, father knows best masculinity. You got to figure out who are they trying to be, because masculinity and femininity in that sense, it's a bit of a performance. Oh, this is me. Okay, this is my understanding of this question. So, grain of salt, but you're here to hear a grain of salt, I guess. Is it's a bit of a performance. You have to decide where on that scale you want to weigh in. Say your guy, say you have a guy, this character is how does my male character experience emotion? My brothers keep telling me my characters are acting gay and that it's unrealistic writing. So first ask another guy, ask a couple other guys besides your brothers, because you don't know, your brothers could be very specific as to what they think masculinity is. So try a few other guys, and if you're getting the same message from all of them, that there's too much femininity in this one character for the character as you've set them up. You want them to be a sensitive person, but your men are saying it's a little, maybe, I don't even know what it means, that he seems too gay. Just it would be more tends more to a feminine reaction emotionally. You could make him gay, and then, your brothers could shut up. Um, or you can, if guys are generally saying that the character as you have delineated him would not, say, worry quite so much about what people think as your character is doing, then hear that. But learn how to hear what people are saying without necessarily having the vocabulary to tell you really what it is that they're finding problematic. And often one's brother is not going to have the ability to frame this in a way that you can just take it or leave it. But if the character is considering people's emotion, other people's feelings too much, that is often a sign of a more feminine leaning man. There's a quality. I read a wonderful article several years ago, actually a couple of them, about gender and gender performance and emotionality and, chemistry. That one was a interview with, I'm trying to remember what her name was. She had been a man tennis star, really famous, and had transitioned to female. And she was saying how when she was a man, she cared a lot less about what people thought. And as a woman, she had a much more sensitivity to awareness of other people's needs and wants. And that was very interesting. Trans people are a terrific source of understanding about issues like this, because they've been there, done that, and this tennis player, I forgot who it was. Louis, do you know who I'm talking about? It wasn't a tennis player, very famous trans woman. Just saying that testosterone, the estrogen versus testosterone, just made a huge difference in her understanding of how little she cared about what other people thought when she was a man. And the assuming pride of place at all times. And this was just the kind of guy she had been. So it doesn't mean your character is that way. But the kind of guy she had been, she assumed that he would get the best place at the table, that people wouldn't question what he said, that he didn't have to worry. Renee Richards, thank you very much, Barbara. What a good interview that had been. And, as a woman, she had to take into account how other people felt. And there was this whole world that she hadn't thought about at all. Then there was an interview with a woman who was had been a tour guide, like somewhere South Carolina, some historic district, that she was a tour guide. And she went on testosterone for a medical condition, and then she thought, oh, this is interesting, let's take a little more and see what it would be like, get just a feeling of what it's like to be a man. And she found the same thing. First of all, she found that it was very relaxing, that she stopped caring so much what other people thought and what other people were doing and how they were doing and what they needed. She just didn't think about it very much. And then the other thing that happened was that her business started to drop off. People didn't like her tours as much because she thought, because she just couldn't read people anymore. She couldn't tell who was interested. She couldn't tell whether she was going over or not. The her charm disappeared. Her husband didn't like it at all. But on the other hand, she didn't care quite as much what he thought either. So marital problems. So that's one thing that you can ask yourself. You can think about how people relate who have been both men and women, who've had both experiences, and then ask your character, how far on that scale? How little do they care what people think? But men who are fairly far along on the masculine scale are going to care very little about what people think, especially, in private life. They don't expect that, they don't worry about how, other people feel about serving them. They feel that they should be served. And that's testosterone. That's biological to some degree. Other men can be extremely charming. But it's something to consider. And definitely when people say the way you're depicting this opposite gender person, whether it's a man writing women or women writing men, if your informants are telling you that you're not getting it right, listen to them. Listen to them and imagine what it is that needs to change. Too emotional. Other guys are emotional, so how is an emotional guy different than, not necessarily different than an emotional woman, but how might they exhibit it differently? How might they be thinking differently? I think that will be of use to you. Kind of a Rosetta Stone of gender. What else do I have? Yeah, what should a female writer keep in mind when writing a male character? That you got to get it right. You got to get it right. You got to, ask people who are of, like any other character, ask the people who are in that category to see what you've done. Talk to you, like what, instead of getting mad at your brothers, say, okay, if you were, a sensitive guy in this situation, which part is over the top? How would you react to that? You hear that somebody's undermining you at work, or somebody that you trusted is selling you out. How would you feel? How long would you grind on that? What would you be thinking, as you were losing sleep and thinking how that person's screwing you? You'll get it. It can be done, but you just have to make sure if somebody is stumbling over something and telling you this is not real, who's in that group, then you have to, and consider that not everybody in that group is going to be the same. Not every guy wants to be Hulk Hogan. Most guys are quite a bit more gentle than that. But on the other hand, there are things that many men don't worry about, that women or people on the more feminine side of the gender question will worry about. Let's see, here's one. Why do people get so attached to fictional characters, fictional relationships? Every time I go through a fictional work, I get overly attached to the characters to the point where my real life doesn't seem to have meaning anymore. How do we deal with attachments to fictional characters? I love that. Well, that's the writer, that's what you're trying for, right? I know when I'm reading something good, I mean, those are people like, and then, a lot of the people I know, but because writers are just, we write, we're not necessarily, that active in the world. We're, people who are super interesting often aren't writers at all because their life is so much more interesting than sitting around trying to describe stuff, right? Usually the writer, people like that have, there's the Neil Cassidy and the Jack Kerouac. So Kerouac would be the writer and Neil Cassidy would be driving the bus, on LSD. So how do you, why do people get so attached to fictional characters and fictional relationships? Is because the author is writing really well. And you enter into the life of that book in a way that it is a complete world. It's sensual. It's got problems that you recognize as part of the world. You identify with somebody in a certain way. You envy somebody in a certain way. You admire other people in a certain way. And something's at stake that gets people caught up in their story. Later on, some people, the characters live on after you finish the book because they haven't put a nail in at the end. The end comes together and then it opens up again. So you can imagine the future life of those characters. You can imagine, when I was younger, I did this much more than I do now, but I imagine I was friends with people and in that world. And the book just went on after I'd finished reading. It became part of my fantasy life. And I think that's an exciting thing. I think that if you, get too delusional about it, it's just like getting too delusional about anything. It's you start to have, if you can't tell the difference between the fictional and factual reality, that's a clinical problem. So you want to rein that in just a little bit. But yeah, fiction is extremely compelling. Here's a question. Malika, do you have suggestions of 5 to 10 minute warm-up exercises for an amateur fiction writer becoming professional? Yes, I think that I'm trying to find exercises that get quickly into a writing space in the student's head. Yeah, the word exercise, where you give them a word that often is a verb and a noun, simple word, and have them write a page, 2 pages on that prompt. Prompts are good. See what they get. Another one is photograph, writing yourself into a photograph, 2 people under a street lamp, pick one of them and be, what's going on in the picture, and just letting them do that. The 10-minute sentence, where you begin a sentence for them, after the 7th inning, Jack, and then let them write for 10 minutes everywhere they would normally put a period, to put a comma and keep writing. That's the long sentence, which I got from my teacher, Kate Braverman. And there is a piece in Guernica magazine online on Kate Braverman, if anybody's interested in taking a look at it. It's somebody who's interested in doing a biography of her. So Zunaid says, there was an article in the New Yorker this week about a passing of a famous literary translator. Got me thinking about, if you get to meet and spend time with people who translate your art into different languages, I wonder how that process goes. Oh, it's very interesting. If you look up Jennifer Croft, Croft, who's the translator of Olga Tokarczuk, and she won the Nobel. And Jennifer writes about, she also translated her most recent one, the Book of Jacob, and she's been on a big push to get translators acknowledged on the covers of books, because they really do write every word in that book into the next language in an understandable way. And if you look up some of her writings, you're going to understand more of what a translator goes through and how they have to really become the other writer. It's a very generous profession. They become the other writer, and yet they are the master of their own language, and they have to kind of pull it across the brain-blood barrier into the new language. It's very interesting. So Jennifer Croft is somebody to be reading. Let's see what else is going on here. Yeah, so one more question. Do people who write bad novels know they are writing bad novels? Generally not. Generally not. The better the writer, the more they worry about the quality of their work. Bad writers tend not to worry about it at all. It's like, oh, this is good. I got a, around the house, we call that, I made a duty. It's like everybody can make a duty. But little kids are so happy about it, and, that's a bad writer is just like, I made a duty. It's like, yeah, you sure did. Whereas a good writer worries that it's a duty. And they do their best not to leave it like that. Yeah. So I do not think bad writers, it's like bad lover. Does a bad lover worry about being a bad lover? Probably not. But a good lover is always on their game, or trying to. All right, so this is good. I think I've gotten everybody's question. Does a good writer ever think their work is good? Occasionally, you'll reread something that you've written and you go, oh yeah, I got it. Yeah. And then that's when you can send it in. That's when you feel better about it. Like, I crawl along on dread all the time. Dissatisfaction. If I feel satisfied with something or happy with it, I'm like, I guess I am a writer after all. Here's a good question. Jill asks, when describing a protagonist in third person, how do you avoid the looking in the mirror cliche? The looking in the mirror cliche is the problem of the first person, that they have to look in the mirror and describe themselves. So when you're doing the first person looking in the mirror thing, it should be emotional. It shouldn't be neutral. It shouldn't be descriptive. She tossed her long blonde hair and thought how ugly I am. Every YA book by a bad writer will have a completely gorgeous person look in the mirror and tell you how hideous they are. Don't do that. So first person catches a look at themselves in a shop window as they're passing by, and notices one sock up, one sock down, or notices the big knot. They don't try to completely describe somebody with a glimpse in the mirror, but notice something. Like I had that trying to get a description of my character Marina M in the the Russian Revolution novels, is she's just had her first big kiss, the big love of her life, as a very young woman, and she's like writing the poem afterwards because she's a poet. Very romantic, and looks at herself in the mirror and imagines how he saw her. See, that's another way to handle it. It always has to be in character and do something beyond description, flat description. It has to do something. It has to be part of a scene. And then there was something else. Zunaid wants the link for the Kate Braverman. Yeah, it's Guernica magazine. So I will put a link in there. Actually, I'll just post it on my author page, and then it'll be there. Okay, well, thank you for joining us for Writing Wednesday. My class at the Community of Writers should be up by the end of the week. So if you want to take it, there's an early bird special, $280 for the early bird special, and that'll go up considerably at the beginning of May. So hope to see you then, and thank you for joining us.